The moment I stepped off that military transport plane, desert sand still clinging to my combat boots, I had no idea my own family was forging my signature on documents that would destroy us all. Before we jump into today's story, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Take a second and drop it in the comments. One quick thing before we begin. I've noticed that most people who watch these stories haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy this kind of content and would like to support the channel, I'd truly appreciate it if you subscribed. Now, let's get into today's story. 18 hours before the armed convoy arrived at my motel door, I had just returned from 4 weeks embedded in a classified intelligence operation in Afghanistan. 4 weeks in a forward operating base with contaminated water. 4-hour sleep rotations while monitoring encrypted terrorist communications for the Defense Intelligence Agency. I had survived mortar fire alongside soldiers who would have thrown themselves between me and shrapnel without hesitation. I had watched my team work with the kind of precision and honor that only comes from people who understand what it means to sacrifice everything. Now I was carrying my tactical duffel bag up pristine marble steps in Aspen, Colorado, where the billionaire groom's family owned a sprawling estate that made the Vail resorts look like ski lodges for middle managers. The mansion rose against the Rocky Mountains like something carved from pure ambition and old money, my sister's wedding. The event I had spent 12 years of my military career funding. For 12 years, I had wired my Defense Intelligence Agency paychecks home to keep my family from drowning. Every deployment paycheck went to cover my father's failed business debts. 3 of them. I paid for my sister's designer wardrobe, every Hermes bag and silk scarf she used to construct a fake aristocratic persona on Instagram, posing in borrowed penthouses and rented yachts. When they were 4 months behind on the mortgage and the bank was threatening to lock them out of the house, I made the payment. I covered their utilities, their credit cards, their lifestyle. I did it all believing that one day, watching her walk down the aisle in a billion-dollar wedding, I would know that my sacrifices had actually built something real. The estate staff directed me to a secluded guest room in the West Wing, far from where the important guests were staying. The air inside was suffocating. Expensive imported peonies choked every corner of the room from crystal vases, their sweet decay mixing with the smell of fresh money. I set my bag down on an embroidered carpet and stood there for a moment, my shoulders screaming from exhaustion, just needing one moment of peace before the rehearsal dinner started. My body was still running on combat adrenaline and stale military coffee, the kind that tastes like metal and keeps your eyes open through midnight watches you've lost count of. I had barely unzipped my duffel when the heavy oak door was violently kicked open, slamming against the wall with a crack that sent my trained reflexes into overdrive. My sister stormed into the room like she owned every square inch of it. The golden child my parents had groomed since childhood. She had spent her entire youth hunting a billionaire husband, fabricating an old money persona on Instagram, using the exact same designer brands I had gone into debt to afford for her. Every photograph she posted was paid for by my combat pay. Every lie was funded by my deployments. Now she was draped in a custom silk gown, worth more than my monthly hazard allowance, flashing an engagement ring worth millions of dollars that she had never earned a single cent toward. She looked at my dusty boots, my calloused hands, the deep fatigue lines around my eyes, and I could see exactly what she saw: a stain, an embarrassment, something that would contaminate her perfect manufactured fairy tale. Without a single word of greeting, without asking if I had survived my deployment, she hurled a white envelope at my chest. It bounced off my jacket and fluttered onto the plush carpet. I recognized what it was immediately: a round-trip boarding pass. A demand for my immediate departure from Aspen. She screamed at me with a voice so shrill it probably reached every neighboring guest room, weaponizing every sacrifice I had ever made for her. She told me to get out. She called me a pathetic soldier. She said my presence humiliated the family. She told me not to let a gun for hire ruin her billionaire wedding photos. I stood completely still. I locked my jaw, using the iron discipline of a trained intelligence operative who had sat through hostile interrogation simulations without breaking eye contact. I counted 3 tactical breaths through my nose, slow and controlled, dropping my heart rate to a resting 60 beats per minute. I refused to let her see my hands tremble. I refused to give her the satisfaction of a single tear. Infuriated by my unbreakable silence, her greedy eyes darted downward, locking onto the vintage diamond pendant resting against my collarbone. Our grandmother's final heirloom, the one piece of jewelry that actually meant something. My grandmother had placed it in my hand on her deathbed and told me I was worth something. She had looked directly into my eyes and said it. In a family of people who had never looked at me, she had seen me. My sister decided that a filthy soldier didn't deserve such elegance. She lunged forward with the kind of greed that honestly terrified me. She violently ripped the chain from my throat. The metal tore my skin. A sharp, white-hot sting of pain flashed across my vision. I felt blood welling up on my neck, the iron taste of it mixing with the suffocating sweetness of those imported peonies filling the room. That was the exact moment everything shattered. I pulled a tactical gauze pad from my cargo pocket and pressed it to the bleeding cut on my neck. In that moment, standing in that guest room, with blood running down my skin and my sister staring at me like I was nothing, I made a decision. She was no longer my family. In the cold, calculated mind of a defense intelligence operative, she had just crossed the perimeter. She was now a hostile target. I descended the grand staircase into the main ballroom without tears, without any visible emotion at all. The space was blinding. Massive crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across hundreds of the most powerful people in America. Waiters in white vests navigated the room with mechanical precision, serving champagne that cost thousands of dollars per bottle. I spotted my parents in the far corner. They were wearing bespoke suits, the tags practically still on them, purchased on a credit line they couldn't pay. My father was puffing his chest out loudly, bragging about imaginary Wall Street investments to investors he was desperately trying to impress. A man who had bankrupted 3 separate businesses. A man I had personally bailed out of every single financial disaster. My brother was leaning against a marble pillar, nursing a glass of expensive scotch that definitely wasn't his. He saw me coming down the stairs. He saw the gauze on my neck, the thin red line of blood peeking above my collar. He locked eyes with me for exactly 1 second, then deliberately turned his back and walked toward the bar. He chose his inheritance over his sister without a single word spoken. I marched directly toward my parents, my combat boots completely out of place on the polished marble floor. I grabbed both their arms and pulled them into a shadowy alcove near an indoor fountain, where the sound of cascading water would cover our conversation. I demanded to know why they had allowed her to physically assault me and steal grandmother's necklace. Their fake smiles dissolved instantly. They looked at the blood on my neck, and I watched the moment they decided it didn't matter. My mother's breath smelled like champagne and cruelty. She told me I was always jealous of my sister because she had found a billionaire husband while I was just a dry soldier no one wanted to look at. She told me not to ruin the family's shining moment. My father stepped aggressively into my personal space. He pointed his finger directly at my face. The same hand that used to hold mine when he walked me to school in 1st grade. Back when I still believed he loved both his daughters equally. He told me that my presence was a diplomatic burden. He said my coarseness would ruin their impression with the ultra-rich. I told him I was not leaving without my grandmother's necklace. He dropped his fatherly act entirely and chose social climbing over his own flesh and blood. He snapped his fingers and flagged down the estate's private security team. He lied to them. He told them I was heavily intoxicated and suffering from severe military paranoia. He told them I was trying to cause a violent scene. He ordered them to remove me immediately. 2 massive guards pinned my arms behind my back. I was frog-marched out of the mansion like a trespassing criminal. Another guard hurled my tactical duffel and garment bag into the dirt beside me. I memorized the guard rotation. I filed away the camera placements above every doorway. I catalogued every access point of the mansion in the tactical partition of my mind. The massive, towering iron gates of the Reeves estate slammed shut behind me with a sickening thud that echoed across the manicured grounds and into the freezing dark. I was standing entirely alone under a flickering dim street lamp in the ultra-wealthy enclave of Aspen. The mountain winter wind cut through my thin jacket like a serrated knife, numbing my fingers within seconds. I pulled out my phone with frozen hands to book a rideshare to a cheap motel, planning to secure legal counsel in the morning to retrieve my necklace. But when the app tried to process the automated payment, A glaring red error flashed across my screen. Transaction declined. Card locked. My tactical instincts flared like tripwires. I switched to my top-tier military credit card, the one with the impeccable payment history I had maintained for over a decade of spotless federal service. Declined again. I opened my banking app and my stomach plummeted to the frozen pavement. My entire balance was frozen. Locked down by an emergency hold. Savings account, investment accounts, my operational reserve fund, my retirement. Everything I had earned in blood and sweat and sleepless deployments was gone. Locked behind a red notification I had never seen before. My credit line was completely zeroed out. The spotless, immaculate federal identity I had spent over a decade building, the credit score I needed to maintain my security clearance, was in ashes. My phone vibrated intensely in my frozen palm. It was my sister-in-law. A ruthless senior corporate attorney, married to my spineless brother, and the only human being connected to my bloodline who possessed a functioning moral compass. Her voice was tight as a tripwire, controlled but crackling with suppressed fury. She told me my credit alert system was screaming. She told me my credit score had collapsed because of a postal routing error. Massive default warnings and overdue notices for accounts I had never opened, loans I had never applied for, had mistakenly arrived at her brownstone instead of my parents' address. She had been frantically trying to reach me for hours while I was on a military transport flight with zero civilian communication access. She rapidly briefed me on the truth with the precision of a lawyer presenting an opening statement. My parents had stolen my social security number from old tax filings I left at their house. They had forged my signatures on bank documents, practicing my handwriting until it was nearly perfect. They had used every piece of my personal data to take out a massive $2 million mortgage entirely in my name. I thought about the bunker I had just left 96 hours ago. The soldiers who shared their last field ration pack with me. The sergeant who stayed awake for 48 straight hours to cover my watch when I was running a fever in the mountain altitude. Those strangers, people who shared nothing with me except the decision to serve, had treated me with more honor than the people who shared my DNA. The reason for the theft was even more sickening than the act itself. My sister needed the money to validate her prenuptial agreement with Julian Reeves, proving her family had generational wealth worthy of the billionaire dynasty. My parents were completely broke, down to their last maxed-out credit card, months behind on their own utilities. They had shattered my identity, pumped the fraudulent debt directly into the Reeves Foundation charity account, and planned to let me face a military court-martial for severe financial default while they popped champagne at the reception. Hearing this, every single ounce of civilian weakness evaporated from my bloodstream like alcohol burning off a wound. I locked down my emotions with military precision, treating the situation as a hostile breach of a secure perimeter. I marched 2 miles in the freezing cold to a 24-hour internet cafe in a neighboring rundown town. My combat boots crunching on gravel and broken glass, past shuttered storefronts and flickering neon signs. There, sitting at a sticky counter under a buzzing fluorescent tube, I received an untraceable encrypted wire transfer from my sister-in-law to fund my operational logistics. The hunt was officially on. I used the wired funds to rent a decaying, creaky motel room tucked behind an abandoned gas station miles away from Aspen's luxury. The walls were stained yellow with decades of cigarette smoke. The carpet smelled like cheap bleach and old sweat. A rust-colored watermark spread across the ceiling like a map of forgotten neglect. Surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights and absolute silence, I unzipped my tactical bag and pulled out my specialized, heavily encrypted military laptop. I bypassed slow commercial networks and activated my specific Defense Intelligence Agency officer privileges and high-level security clearances. I plugged directly into the federal tracking systems and military intelligence database through anonymous routing protocols. My hands flew across the keys, a blur of motion. The rhythmic clacking echoed in the dead silent room like a machine gun on burst fire. I ran packet sniffers and executed decryption codes to track the digital footprint of the $2 million stolen debt under my name. My fingers cramped around the keyboard. My eyes burned from the screen glare. The coffee beside my laptop went cold and untouched. I was no longer a discarded daughter. I was a cyber warfare operator locking onto a target, The raw data unpacked on my screen, scrolling in rapid lines of green text that cast a sickly glow across my exhausted face. My father, Douglas, had bypassed standard banking channels entirely. He had used an underground dark web financial network to expedite the transfer, panicking to meet the billionaire's prenup deadline before anyone could verify the source of the funds. He thought he was being clever, outsmarting the system like he outsmarted his creditors. He thought he was saving a few thousand in transfer fees. He had no idea he had walked barefoot into a minefield that would blow his entire family to pieces. The transaction log showed he had pushed the $2 million through a digital offshore transit hub called Nexus Transit Finance. The moment that specific name hit the terminal, my federal digital alarms flared blinding red across the screen. Nexus Transit Finance is not a normal company. It is a core money laundering link of a notorious transnational criminal organization, a cartel currently placed under the highest national security surveillance by both the FBI and Defense Intelligence Agency. Every single transaction moving through Nexus was flagged with radioactive heat by federal authorities, monitored around the clock by the same kind of analysts I worked alongside every day. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard, I could feel the pulse throbbing in my wounded neck. My father hadn't just committed wire fraud. He had actively utilized a terrorist-affiliated banking node while operating under my stolen federal identity. The sheer blinding stupidity of my family had just triggered a massive federal tripwire. While I spent my entire career building digital firewalls to protect the nation's financial systems from exactly this kind of criminal infiltration, my own father was funneling cartel blood money through my name to buy his youngest daughter a billionaire wedding. I hammered a final aggressive command into the terminal to trace the exact endpoint of the dirty cash. The system confirmed the radioactive money had been shot directly into the internal charity escrow account of Reeves Global Capital, the $50 billion empire of one of the most powerful financial dynasties in America. A cold, utterly ruthless smile touched my lips. The first movement of my face in hours. These fools, blinded by their desperate climb to the elite, had unknowingly planted a financial nuclear bomb inside the chest cavity of a global corporation. Reeves Global's survival on the stock market depended on pristine corporate transparency and regulatory compliance. One whiff of cartel money in their accounts, and federal authorities would descend on them like a plague. My parents had stupidly turned it into a national economic security disaster capable of leveling any corporation. The shift from emotional pain to cold tactical execution was complete. I began compiling the kill file as the first rays of dawn crept through the motel blinds, casting pale light across the stained walls and my laptop screen. The sun broke over the Rocky Mountains, illuminating the billionaire estates of Aspen. While I was still locked in my dim motel room, compiling threat matrices and cross-referencing transaction logs, my digital war was entirely silent, but their counterattack was deafening. My phone vibrated so violently it nearly rattled off the cheap wooden desk, buzzing against the scarred surface like an angry trapped insect. I swiped through the incoming notifications, my eyes narrowing as I read the headlines. My family had paid a black hat public relations firm to detonate a sickening smear campaign across elite gossip blogs and social media channels. They aggressively spread the rumor that the missing sister from the lavish bridal photos was a deeply disturbed military veteran suffering from severe violent PTSD. My name was plastered across tabloid sites next to fabricated quotes from unnamed family sources, expressing deep concern for my dangerous mental state. The articles fabricated sensationalized lies, stating I was prone to paranoid delusions and unhinged violence resulting from battlefield trauma. They wrote that my family, acting out of deep parental love, was forced to lock me away in a highly secure psychiatric facility to ensure the absolute safety of the billionaire wedding guests. They used this cruel medical cover to destroy my credibility, ensuring that if I showed up and denounced the $2 million theft, everyone would just consider it the babbling of a mental patient. It was a master stroke of character assassination, designed to preemptively destroy any whistleblowing I might attempt before I could open my mouth. An encrypted call from the Pentagon flashed on my screen. My direct Defense Intelligence Agency commander's voice was rigid over the line. He told me that the PR nightmare my family just detonated had upper management extremely nervous, Until they medically verified these psychiatric allegations, my clearance was locked. I was grounded from all federal systems pending a full psychological review. The line went dead. My hand went white-knuckled around the phone. My jaw clenched so hard I tasted the metallic bite of a cracked filling. My own mother and father had filed false federal documents to have me deemed mentally unfit for service, forcing the military to isolate me to protect their pristine public image. I was officially locked out of the system I had sworn my life to protect. Sitting in their luxury mansion suite, my parents were undoubtedly clinking champagne glasses, convinced this media blade had severed my last lifeline, leaving me shamed, powerless, and permanently trapped by military red tape. But they knew absolutely nothing about the psychology of an intelligence operative who has been cornered. I didn't shed a single tear of panic. Instead, an electrifying rush of absolute liberation surged through my veins like a shot of pure adrenaline. The lockout was my key out of the federal cage. I was no longer a uniformed officer, bound by strict rules of engagement, chain of command, and months of bureaucratic approval for every operational decision. I was a ghost. An untethered operative with all the knowledge, all the training, all the classified intelligence, and none of the restrictions. My family had just unknowingly handed me full authorization to execute a scorched earth strike as a private citizen. While the morning sun blazed over Aspen on the day of my sister's dream wedding, a two-pronged counterattack initiated with lethal precision from opposite ends of the state. Down in the bustling financial district of Denver, my sister-in-law marched through the revolving glass doors of Rocky Mountain Trust Bank, heading straight for the private office of Richard Harmon, the negligent, lazy bank manager who had rubber-stamped my parents' identity theft without performing a single basic verification check. She was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal power suit, radiating the absolute authority of a senior corporate litigator who had personally crushed Fortune 500 executives in courtrooms. She slammed a thick leather briefcase onto his polished mahogany desk. The thud echoed through his glass-walled office like a gunshot. Papers on his desk jumped, his coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug. She ripped open the briefcase latches and threw a stack of notarized filings across his desk. She stated with glacial calmness that he had authorized a $2 million offshore transfer tied to the cartel without a single compliance check. She told him to hand over the security footage and internal files right now, or he would spend the next 25 years in a federal maximum security penitentiary for complicity in money laundering. Harmon completely broke down within 4 minutes, sweating profusely, his white dress shirt soaking through at the collar and darkening under the arms, trembling so violently his reading glasses fell off his nose. He bypassed his own bank's security protocols and handed over everything. The raw, unedited security footage from the loan signing. The video clearly showed my parents grinning with visible nauseating satisfaction as they forged my mortgage documents, practicing my signature 3 times on a scratch pad before committing it to the official papers with a theatrical flourish. More devastatingly, she extracted a voicemail my father had arrogantly left on Harmon's answering machine to confirm the transfer. His voice echoed through the office, casual and cheerful, telling the banker not to worry about me contesting the mortgage because they were having me locked in a psychiatric ward for military trauma today. He told him the money was safe. He told him I was too busy playing soldier in the desert to ever find out what they had done. My sister-in-law uploaded the raw, undeniable files to our secure encrypted server before Harmon could change his mind. We now possessed the smoking gun needed to destroy their entire narrative. Receiving her data stream at the motel on my encrypted laptop, I went to work with rapid surgical focus. I compiled all the intelligence evidence, security videos, bank transaction records, cartel transit logs, and the complete financial forensic history into a 100-page top-secret document named Economic Security Threat Dossier. It explicitly mapped out exactly how Reeves Global was currently harboring radioactive cartel cash inside its charity escrow, tracing every contaminated dollar from the dark web node through the Nexus Transit Hub and directly into the corporation's pristine balance sheet. I didn't waste time attacking a $50 billion corporate firewall. I utilized my federal credentials to mandate an emergency financial regulatory commission, flash audit alert, routing the dossier through secure federal compliance channels straight to Chairman Marcus Reeves' chief risk officer, tagged with a priority red flag that legally required the chairman's immediate personal viewing. The deed was done. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The sound was sharp and final in the silent motel room. I walked to my garment bag hanging on the back of the bathroom door, unzipped it, and pulled out my pristine military dress uniform, heavy with hard-earned medals of honor. Bronze Star, Commendation Medal, Global Defense Service Ribbon. Each one earned in blood and sacrifice, sleepless months that my family had never once acknowledged, never once asked about, never once cared to understand. I fastened every single button with cold precision, straightened my collar over the thin scar on my neck, and pinned each medal in its exact regulation position. The weight of the uniform settled onto my shoulders, like armor plating. I transformed myself from a discarded sister, sitting in a decaying motel room, into an armored spearhead of justice. Checking my IP tracker on the laptop one final time before shutting it down, I watched the red dots light up across the digital map as the FBI, the Financial Regulatory Commission, and Reeves Global's internal security network frantically downloaded the kill file simultaneously, their servers pinging in panicked rapid succession. The battle was no longer in the hands of petty fraudsters. It was on the chessboard of titans. I stepped out of the motel into the cold morning light, my polished boots crunching on the gravel, and stood perfectly still, waiting for the storm to arrive. Less than 30 minutes after I hit send, the roar of massive engines shattered the quiet of the motel parking lot. The ground vibrated under my feet. My family undoubtedly thought their hired estate security would arrest me on sight if I showed my face at the wedding. But they had fatally miscalculated the gravity of federal crimes. A convoy of 3 matte black, heavily armored SUVs from Sentinel Security Operations, Reeves Global's private security division, slammed on their brakes in the motel lot, kicking up a massive storm of dust and gravel that coated my freshly pressed uniform. Hardened private military operatives stepped out in synchronized formation, their hands hovering near concealed weapons beneath tailored tactical suits, scanning the perimeter with the practiced efficiency of men extracting a high-value asset from a war zone. I counted 6 operators, 2 flanking the lead vehicle, 4 establishing a perimeter. Standard VIP extraction protocol. The commander didn't pull handcuffs on me or treat me like a rogue threat. Instead, he rushed forward, his face drained of all color, pale with the existential dread of a man who understood that his employer's entire financial kingdom was about to collapse into the ocean. He bowed 90 degrees, his body folding with desperate reverence. He told me that I needed to step in immediately, or Chairman Reeves' $50 billion empire would completely vaporize in exactly 3 hours. I gave a single curt nod, my face entirely devoid of emotion. Not a smile, not a frown. The blank, controlled mask of an officer who had spent years in classified briefing rooms where a single facial expression could compromise national security. I stepped into the back of the armored SUV, sinking into the leather seat that smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne, riding back toward the Aspen mega mansion, not as a disgraced outcast thrown into the freezing street, but as a supreme, heavily guarded VIP, holding the absolute fate of a global corporation in my scarred hands, when our convoy breached the main gates of the Reeves estate. The exact same guards who had violently thrown me out the night before stood frozen in pure visible terror, parting like the Red Sea as the armored vehicles rolled through. One of them, the larger guard who had personally pinned my arms behind my back and marched me out like a criminal, visibly swallowed hard when he recognized my face above the gleaming medals on my chest. I stepped out of the vehicle slowly, deliberately, letting every person watching absorb the transformation. I marched directly into the grand ballroom, through the same massive oak doors I had been dragged through in the opposite direction just hours before. Hundreds of billionaires, tech CEOs, hedge fund managers, and powerful politicians were laughing, sipping expensive champagne beneath soaring ceilings and classical symphony music. Crystal chandeliers scattered prismatic light across designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air was thick with perfume and ambition, and the invisible stench of old money protecting itself. But the second those massive oak doors swung open, and I stepped inside in my commanding dress uniform, radiating absolute lethal intent with every metal catching the chandelier light, the orchestra violently stopped playing mid-measure. The lead violinist's bow screeched across the strings. Dead silence choked the room like a hand around a throat. Every head turned. Every champagne flute froze mid-sip. My sister's face drained of color so fast, she looked like she had been struck by divine lightning. From the top of the sweeping marble staircase, Chairman Marcus Reeves, the ruthless titan of Wall Street, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and hawk-like eyes, who had built his empire by crushing competitors for 4 decades, practically sprinted down the steps. He ignored his bewildered son Julian. He walked right past the ghostly, terrified faces of my sister and parents standing paralyzed near the champagne fountain. He marched straight to me, the most powerful man in the room, a man who had made presidents wait for his phone calls, extended both weathered hands, grasping mine with absolute reverence in front of the entire elite class. His grip was tight, almost desperate, the grip of a man who had just stared directly into the abyss of total financial annihilation and been pulled back from the edge. The room held its collective breath. He thanked me. He told me that my timely intelligence file had saved his corporation from catastrophic collapse in reputation and stock. The ballroom erupted into shocked, frantic whispers. The metaphorical slap to my family's face was deafening. The coarse, pathetic broke soldier they had thrown into the freezing street 18 hours ago was now the ultimate savior of the most powerful empire in the room. I stood tall before the assembled kings of Wall Street. I didn't wait for Reeves to explain the situation to his confused, murmuring guests. I projected my voice with the crisp, undeniable authority of an intelligence officer delivering a field briefing, slicing through the whispers like a blade. I told them the $2 million sum in their charity fund was stolen money using my forged signature. I explained that my parents had used the cartel's money laundering network to move that cash into Reeves Global's system, making it evidence of a federal national security crime. I pointed directly at my sister, whose knees buckled visibly beneath her custom wedding gown, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to streak as the blood drained from her face. Julian Reeves, the proud young CEO and her groom, the man who had slipped that $1 million ring on her finger, turned from furious to violently disgusted in a single heartbeat. He recoiled from my sister as if she were carrying a highly contagious plague, desperately wiping his hands on his expensive suit jacket, the same hands that had held hers at the altar rehearsal just hours before. Driven into a corner of absolute primal panic, seeing her entire fraudulent empire collapsing in real time, my mother lunged forward from the crowd, deploying the final pathetic weapon of a trapped manipulator. She fake sobbed, tears streaming down her face as she desperately clawed at Chairman Reeves' $10,000 jacket sleeve, smearing mascara across the immaculate fabric. She pleaded with him not to believe me. She told him I had PTSD. She told him I was paranoid. She told him I was making things up to destroy my sister's happiness. My father immediately joined the chorus. His face beat red. He screamed that I belonged in a straitjacket. He called me an insanely jealous mental patient trying to ruin them. They were doubling down on the smear campaign right in front of the people they were trying to impress. Too panicked to realize that every hysterical word they screamed was confirming their guilt to a room full of Wall Street predators who could smell fraud like blood in the water. I didn't argue with their hysterical screaming. I stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind my back in parade rest, and simply gave a sharp, tactical nod to the estate security tech team, who were now exclusively following my orders under Chairman Reeves' direct personal authorization. The massive projector screen above the stage, the one meant for the romantic wedding montage of my sister and Julian's carefully curated love story, flashed to life with a harsh white glare that made half the room squint. My sister-in-law appeared via a live video feed from her office in Denver, her face cold and composed behind her designer glasses, not a hair out of place, the embodiment of legal fury in a tailored blazer, with a single press of a button. She broadcast the raw bank security footage onto the massive screen. Every single person in that ballroom watched my parents grinning as they forged my signature on the mortgage documents, practicing on a scratch pad, signing with a triumphant flourish. The room gasped in unison. Immediately after, the voicemail blasted through the ballroom's concert-grade speakers, my father's arrogant voice echoing loudly off the flawless marble walls, telling the banker they were having me locked in a psychiatric ward for military trauma today. He told him the money was safe. He told him I was too busy playing soldier in the desert to ever find out what they had done. His laughter filled every corner of the ballroom. My mother's fake tears stopped instantly, replaced by the wide, hollow, dead-eyed stare of a woman watching her entire, carefully constructed reality disintegrate in high definition before 500 witnesses. The evidence was absolute, but I refused to let a video do all my fighting. I unclasped my hands from behind my back and stepped directly into my parents' personal space, towering over their trembling frames. I looked my mother dead in the eye and held her gaze until she physically recoiled, pressing herself backward into my father, who had nowhere left to retreat. I delivered the final freezing command. I told them their fake empire was dead. I told them to savor their tears for the federal judge. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice by a single decibel. My tone was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of that ballroom, it carried to every single person with the clarity of a rifle shot. That single cold-blooded sentence shattered their remaining bravado into a million irreparable pieces. My father's mouth opened, closed, opened again, worked soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. No words came out. There was no defense. No more lies. No more gaslighting. No more fake tears. The ironclad evidence and my absolute dominance completely severed their retreat, flaying the pathetic toxic masks off the fake aristocrats for the entire world of wealth and power to see. In the terrifying silence that followed my final words, Chairman Edward Marcus Reeves snatched the multi-million-dollar prenuptial agreement directly from his personal lawyer's trembling hands. The thick stack of pages, the legal foundation of my sister's entire fraudulent fairy tale, crumpled in his iron grip. He ripped it into shreds with the savage fury of a man protecting his legacy, hurling the confetti of lies directly into my sister's tear-streaked face. He roared with earth-shattering fury, the veins in his neck bulging, his silver hair disheveled for the first time in probably 40 years of meticulous public composure. He declared that his empire did not harbor fraudsters and money launderers and ordered everything cancelled. On his command, the massive security team swarmed my sister, grabbing her by both arms to physically remove her from the property she had dreamed of owning and ruling as a billionaire's wife. They roughly yanked the $1 million diamond engagement ring from her trembling finger, tossing it onto the marble floor, where it bounced and skidded away like a worthless pebble. They confiscated every black credit card, every piece of borrowed luxury on her body, the designer earrings, the platinum bracelet, the silk clutch embossed with the Reeves family crest. Everything that had been loaned to prop up her carefully constructed fraud was stripped away in brutal, efficient seconds. I walked slowly toward her, my medals catching the chandelier light with every measured step, staring down into the weeping, ruined, mascara-streaked eyes of my vicious sibling. The same eyes that had looked at me with contempt and disgust just 18 hours ago in that guest room, without a single word of sympathy, without a flicker of hesitation. I reached out and took back my grandmother's diamond pendant from around her bare, trembling neck. I secured it around my own throat where it always belonged, the cool weight of the diamond settling against the thin scar she had carved into my skin when she stole it. I pressed the pendant against my collarbone with my fingertips, feeling the familiar edges of the stone my grandmother had placed in my hand on her last living day. It was returned. The estate guards grabbed my family by their collars, dragging them across the same polished marble floors they had strutted across just hours ago, with champagne in their hands and lies dripping from their smiling mouths. My father's bespoke suit ripped wide open at the shoulder seam, exposing the cheap undershirt beneath the expensive fabric. My mother's designer heels snapped clean off on the gravel outside, sending her stumbling. My brother, the coward who had turned his back on me at the staircase, who chose his inheritance over his sister's bleeding neck, was shoved out alongside them, his lifelong silence finally earning its own punishment. They were literally thrown out of the mansion gates into utter, complete humiliation under the aspen sky. Waiting right outside the towering iron bars, engines idling in the darkness, were dozens of FBI agents. The area was bathed in dizzying, flashing red and blue lights that sliced through the night and illuminated my family's terrified faces in strobing hellish color. They slammed my parents onto the hoods of their cruisers, faces pressed against cold metal, The harsh metallic click of federal handcuffs snapping shut echoed across the silent estate grounds as they were arrested for money laundering and massive identity theft. My mother screamed a raw animal sound that cut through the night. My father went completely silent for the first time in his life. I watched from inside the gates, my posture straight, my hands still. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the clean, sharp, boned clarity of a completed mission. 18 months later, absolute justice was served. My parents were rotting in Colorado's Supermax facility, stripped of every single asset for restitution, sharing a cell block with the same category of violent criminals they had unknowingly partnered with through their greed and stupidity. My sister, the wannabe billionaire bride, who had ripped the heirloom from my throat and called me a coarse, pathetic soldier, was now a hollow-eyed retail worker in a discount department store, folding clearance shirts for minimum wage under fluorescent lights, enduring the daily whispered mockery of former socialites who recognized her face from the tabloid coverage of her spectacular downfall. My cowardly brother was divorced by my sister-in-law, who cited moral incompatibility and took every asset in the settlement with surgical legal precision, leaving him penniless in an efficiency motel room. Meanwhile, high above the Denver Tech Quarter, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains, I adjusted the collar of my tailored power suit and checked my reflection in the glass. My sister-in-law walked in carrying 2 glasses of vintage red wine, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor of our firm's headquarters. We clinked them together, the crystal ringing like a victory bell in the office we built from nothing. Together, we had launched the most feared private security and legal consulting firm in Colorado, a company built on the ashes of every lie my family had ever told. My grandmother's diamond pendant rested against my collarbone, catching the last warm light of the evening sun through the windows. The scar beneath it had healed into a thin silver line, a permanent reminder that I had survived the people who were supposed to love me. Karma missed no one.